There's only one word that I have to describe Kentucky's win over North Carolina: clutch.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be recapping Kentucky basketball's 87-83 win over North Carolina in the CBS Sports Classic. Clutch performance from the boys here down the stretch. Really impressed with this win. Going to talk about the good, the bad, and what we should be looking forward to over these next few weeks. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcasts, would appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. 87-83 was the final score. Wildcats take the CBS Sports Classic over the Tar Heels. We'll start with the good, obviously, here. But before we dive into any individual performances that I really enjoyed and were obviously deserving of praise, I want to talk about what this means for Kentucky and their resume. So I believe it was on yesterday's episode. It might have been on the episode before that. We talked about Kentucky's net ranking and where they currently sit in bracketology. And right now, they currently sit as a 6th seed, and they are number 38 in the net ranking. Why? Because of their loss to UNC Wilmington. It really hurt the Wildcats' strength of schedule, and it hurt their strength of resume. And getting a quad one victory as quickly as possible would be very important for Kentucky. Thankfully, they had one this weekend against North Carolina. So what does this mean for Kentucky's resume? They now have a quad one win. And that's really important because it changes where you are going to end up in the net rankings at the end of the season. Because you get a win like this, it's also going to change where you are right now. And so looking ahead, you may ask yourself, okay, how many more opportunities does Kentucky have to get these quad one victories over the course of this SEC schedule, essentially? Because Louisville and Illinois State are not going to be quad one wins. Well, I went through and I looked to see what Kentucky's quad one opportunities are. And in case you are wondering, according to the net rankings, in order for it to be a quad one opportunity, the team has to be ranked inside the top 30 if the game is being played at home for Kentucky. It has to be inside the top 50 if it is at a neutral site, and then it has to be a top 75 team if it is on the road. So, going off of that criteria, these are the quad one opportunities Kentucky now has. On the road at Florida to begin their SEC slate. Third game of the SEC schedule at Texas A&M is also a quad one opportunity. Mississippi State at home, believe it or not, is actually a quad two opportunity. They are currently ranked 41st in the net. They need to be top 30 in order for that to be a game Kentucky can qualify as a quad one win if they do end up winning it. South Carolina on the road, believe it or not, is actually a quad one opportunity, as is Tennessee at home. Gonzaga, believe it or not, is actually a quad two game right now. Gonzaga needs to be top 30 in order for it to be considered a quad one game. They are currently ranked number 39 in the net rankings. At Auburn, Alabama at home, Mississippi State on the road, and Tennessee on the road are also quad one opportunities. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only 8 more opportunities on this schedule for Kentucky to pick up quad one wins. Arkansas, obviously falling off the face of the earth, is a huge problem here. Mississippi State could be top 30 by the time they faced off against the Wildcats. We'll keep an eye on that. Gonzaga hopefully will rebound, and they will also be a top 30 team by the time they face UK. But this is really big for Kentucky's resume to kind of close out their last real contest of this non-con slate before they play Gonzaga in February, obviously, it kind of helps them build some momentum, and we'll talk about that later on in the show. So that's what I wanted to start off here with, is what does it mean for Kentucky's resume? Big things moving forward, and it really helps them out once they get to the postseason, if they get to the postseason, I should say. The first player I want to highlight here, as far as the good things that we saw in this contest, how about Aaron Bradshaw? Picked up his fourth foul with about 17 minutes left in this one, had to come in for the final few minutes of this game, and he played pretty well. Obviously missed a couple of clutch free throws, but was able to hit that one to make it a 4-point game to close things out there at the very end. 12 points on the day overall for Aaron. Had, 3 total rebounds, all of them offensive. He had 2 steals, no blocks, but he finished with the team's highest plus-minus, actually the game's highest plus-minus at +9. I was very impressed with Aaron Bradshaw on this one. A couple of very clutch baskets. He made that three-pointer early. He's proving in his limited shooting that he can, in fact, knock down the outside shot when given the opportunity. And hey, if he can prove to be consistent in that as the season progresses, he doesn't, and by no means he does not need to be a volume shooter, but if he is able to knock down the occasional outside shot, that's going to prove to be very valuable for Kentucky moving forward. Aaron Bradshaw did a little bit of everything on the offensive and defensive end of the floor. Obviously struggled at times with Armando Bacot, but Bacot himself was not able to really get anything going offensively. In fact, he only finished with 9 points. He did finish 3 of 4 shooting, but he wasn't really able to get those shots off consistently, and he wasn't really able to find opportunities to get good looks. In fact, 6 turnovers for Bacot on the day. You've got to give credit to Trey Mitchell and Aaron Bradshaw, and then you've got Onyenso, who did end up, in fact, playing in this contest. So 10 minutes, by the way, for you go. So those are the first 2 things I want to point out here, the positives from this contest. Kentucky's resume definitely gets a boost here, and then also Aaron Bradshaw was the player that I think I was most impressed with, finished with the best plus-minus on the afternoon. We'll pause here real quick for water. A little bit of a dry throat, very stressed after that game, as I'm sure you are as well. And I want to kind of dive into some more positives that I took away from this game in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Let's say you're looking for some last-minute tickets to a sporting event this weekend. Maybe you're trying to go to an NFL game, an NBA game. Maybe you're trying to get some tickets to a Kentucky game here in a few days. Well, good news, you are in luck with Game Time, because they are the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It is the place to find last-minute seats. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. You can download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, wrapping up the Saturday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. I really appreciate you making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Appreciate those out there subscribed. If you have not subscribed already, whether it be on the podcast feed or on the YouTube channel, I would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and subscribed. If you have any thoughts as to how this game played out, let me know in the YouTube comments below. If you were excited, if you were nervous, if you were stressed, how you feel about the team moving forward. Obviously, we're going to get into what this means for Kentucky moving forward, and I want to kind of dive into some things that I talked about recently about, the momentum that it could bring to the table for Kentucky. We'll talk about that later on in the show, but let's continue to talk about the good from this game. 87-83 was the final score. Big resume building victory for the Wildcats. Aaron Bradshaw playing very well. How about Kentucky creating points out of turnovers? That's something that I wanted to highlight here. So Kentucky only had 7 steals of North Carolina's 17 turnovers in this game. Just shows how many times North Carolina kind of shot themselves in the foot on occasion, whether it be traveling, throwing the ball out of bounds, that crazy carom there at the end where the ball went off of Cormac Ryan's backside end up getting picked up, but it was still an over and back before I believe it was R.J. Davis that picked it up, could really recover it. But North Carolina in this one made some serious mistakes. And Kentucky ended up cashing in off of turnovers, 19 points off of 17 North Carolina turnovers. Impressive what the Wildcats were able to do, capitalizing on UNC's mistakes. And they were able to kind of clutch this thing out, largely due in part to UNC's opportunities that they gave Kentucky. And that kind of brings me into my my next point here. North Carolina took a 72-71 lead late in the game, and then Kentucky responded. There have been multiple occasions over the past 2 seasons where Kentucky has either battled or controlled a contest for the majority of the time themselves and whatever team they're playing are going at it. They've controlled the game, or they've been in the game and they've been leading by just a little bit. And then at the very end, the opponent throws their final left hook, gives it everything they've got, and it's enough to put Kentucky on the floor and makes sure I can't talk, that the Wildcats stay down. You saw in the Kansas State game in the NCAA tournament a few wild threes towards the end of the game, and it was enough to put Kentucky away. Dajuan Harris, however you pronounce his name, for Kansas this season, a couple of wild threes there at the end, shots that he normally does not take, nor does he hit consistently. And he's not a bad three-point shooter. He just normally doesn't go 5 of 6. You also don't see Kentucky normally sag off of every three-point shooter that they see, which we'll get to in a second. But he hit some threes late in that game, and it was enough to kind of keep Kentucky out of a contest. They had controlled it at various points. But in this one, when R.J. Davis hit his 2 threes there late in the game, it was like, okay, Kentucky's going to miss some shots, and North Carolina's going to get this one at the foul line, and they're going to end up winning it and taking the lead here shortly, and it's going to be incredibly frustrating because it was built off the back of 2 wild three-point shots there at the end that Davis had not taken essentially all game. They were more contested there, whereas he had taken and made a couple of more open threes earlier in the contest. But Kentucky responded. Kentucky was able to get buckets on the offensive end of the floor or go to the line. And when UNC took that 72-71 lead, Kentucky immediately, bang, 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 3 different buckets, timeout North Carolina, 77-72, and it was just enough to ward off North Carolina after they cut it to 1 a couple of different points there as the game wound down. But Kentucky, at the foul line or getting buckets from either Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner, or Antonio Reeves, they all made some really nice mid-range shots. They were able to settle and get things done after North Carolina threw their final punch. Very impressive. Very impressive. Also, something I should note here, the mature, experienced, senior-laden North Carolina squad with Armando Bacot and R.J. Davis, who have been playing college basketball for a very long time, they made the mistakes that killed the game at the end. It was not Kentucky, who was playing 4 freshmen to wind the game down, that was making mistakes. It was North Carolina, the team that currently has players in their rotation that average over 3 years of experience per player. That's 4th nationally, by the way. We talked about that in the preview episode. Very experienced team that knows how to close things out, and they couldn't do it against a very young and inexperienced Kentucky squad. I think that should bring a lot of excitement to Wildcat fans as you look ahead to how this season could pan out. When you have guys like Rob Dillingham, who went 6 for 16 in this game, 1 of 6 from 3, was not the best shooter, but hit a couple of clutch layups there towards the end. Wagner, who went 6 of 14 in this one, had 6 rebounds. He had 5 assists to 2 turnovers. He also had a steal, had those 14 points. He played well at different moments in this one as well. Had that clutch bucket. Antonio Reeves, who was 2 of 9 in this one, but still, that second shot that he hit late, coming off of that screen, that nice mid-range floater, tough. It was just impressive. They closed things out. Looking ahead, Kentucky fans, should be excited to see that they have that in them. The ceiling of this team is incredibly high. It's the question of whether or not they'll be able to reach that ceiling consistently in the moments that matter. We'll see. We'll have to see. But tonight, against a very good, older North Carolina squad, they were able to get it done. Very impressive, very pleased. No notes negatively, I don't think, on this one. There were some moments where Kentucky could have done a little bit better of a job on the defensive end of the floor. But North Carolina kind of made things interesting at the foul line. They made they made 21 free throws. Kentucky made 19 as well. I mean, both teams got to the foul line pretty consistently. They were able to keep things close and almost win it there towards the end, but Kentucky prevails. So what now? What does Kentucky do now that they've moved past this win? Well, we talked about it on yesterday's episode, but I want to reiterate some of the things that we discussed as far as the momentum that Kentucky could build here. Before I explain all of that, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks. They are easily the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports right now. Whenever I get to play, I absolutely love it. It is just you against the numbers instead of battling thousands of other players or pros and sharks. You can sit there, you can pick more or less on 2 to 6 stat projections for different players, and you can watch the winnings roll in. It's really simple to play. I can actually make my picks and submit my entry in just less than a minute. There are quick withdrawals as well. It's super easy gameplay, and they have an enormous selection of player and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the number one daily fantasy sports app. And it's not just things like the NFL, which I've discussed recently on the show for like passing yards and rushing yards and more or less on that. You can also go for the NBA, and whenever the MLB is in session here in a couple of months, you can also go to Prize Picks for that. You can go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege right now, though, and if you use code LockedOnCollege, you can get a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege, and using code LockedOnCollege, you can get a first deposit match up to $100. That is Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, wrapping up the Saturday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. So we talked about this on yesterday's episode, but I want to reiterate it here. Now that it has come to fruition, what should we be looking at moving forward as Kentucky fans, and what should the team be looking at? Well, look at these next few games, and I'm going to pitch it in a little bit of a different way than I did at the beginning of the year. Before I dive into this, though, I do want to be clear. There's still some very difficult games in this stretch. None of them are guaranteed wins. None of them. But I think we can look at this one a little bit more optimistically now. So your next game is the 21st at Louisville. 86-72 is what KenPom currently projects for the Wildcats. They give them a 90% chance to win this one. Kentucky should win this game. 1-0. Illinois State, you are probably going to beat. 96% chance according to KenPom. 2-0. You go on the road to Florida. I picked Kentucky to win this game whenever I was doing my schedule predictions at the beginning of the season. I'm going to stick with it here, but I do want to point out this has the ability to be a very difficult game for the Wildcats, one that they could lose by 20. Who knows? But I picked them to win. I'm sticking with that. Florida not as impressive as maybe they could be right now. Riley Kugel Krugel. I think it is Kugel. He's not been as consistent as we would have expected him to be. Potential NBA guard, just has not really shown what he could be offensively. So I think that Kentucky has the ability to go on the road and win that game. 3-0. At home against Missouri, I think you can win that one. 4-0. Texas A&M. KenPom projects the Wildcats to lose this one by 3. This is a Texas A&M team that can be very good offensively, cannot shoot the 3 ball this season, and is also very confusing at times whenever Wade Taylor is not on the court. This is a game Kentucky can win if they are able to focus on the defensive end and prevent easy layups. That's very difficult to do. That's very difficult to do on the road, But Kentucky can do it. They have the ability to do it. So you could very well be heading into mid-January at home against Mississippi State. You could be 5-0 over your next 5 games. And then all of a sudden you're looking up at 13-2. You've picked up a couple of quad 1 wins. You now have 3 total under your belt. And you're not going to cruise at any point through the rest of this schedule, but you can have confidence knowing that you are a good team and you have the potential and you have that ability to put together consistent stretches against tough opponents. Florida, Missouri, and Texas A&M, that's going to be very difficult. Kentucky could go 0-3. They could go 0-3. But I'm sitting here right now looking at this team after gutting out a win against UNC, after a couple of weeks ago losing to UNC Wilmington, and I'm saying, okay, you have the opportunity to really turn things around now and turn things on. Let's see if you can do it. I have faith. We'll see how it pans out. If you've got any thoughts on Kentucky basketball and their momentum that they have on this North Carolina win, looking ahead on the schedule, you can leave all of that in the YouTube comments below or hit me on the socials. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all on Monday for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.